His bodyguard grabbed her arm and yanked her off the hood of the SUV like she was trash on the sidewalk. "Get her out of the road," Adrian Moretti said from inside, not even looking up from his phone. The woman was screaming something about a baby. He heard it. He didn't care. Men like Adrian Moretti hadn't survived this long by caring about strangers in the rain. But then the screaming stopped, and that silence was somehow worse than anything he had ever heard in his life. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that rainy Chicago street because nothing about that night was going to end the way anyone expected. The rain had been falling for 3 hours without mercy. Not the soft kind of rain that makes people nostalgic, the kind that smells like clean pavement and reminds you of childhood summers. This was Chicago in November. A brutal horizontal rain that came sideways off Lake Michigan and cut through every layer of clothing like it had a personal grudge. The kind of rain that doesn't fall on you. It attacks you. Nina Whitmore had been running for 11 minutes. She knew that because she had been counting. Counting helped her not think about the weight in her arms. Counting helped her not think about the sound Rosie was making, or more accurately, the sound Rosie had stopped making. Because when a 1-year-old stops crying in a weather like this, it's not because they've calmed down. It's because they no longer have the strength to cry. Nina's sneakers, canvas thin-soled, completely wrong for rain, had soaked through within the first 30 seconds. She could feel the cold water squeezing between her toes, with every step a small misery stacked on top of a catastrophic one. She had Rosie pressed against her chest, tucked under the front of her coat, both arms wrapped around her daughter's small body, trying to give the baby whatever warmth was left in her own skin. There wasn't much left. Okay, baby. Okay, Nina kept whispering as she ran, not because Rosie could hear her clearly, not because the words meant anything. She whispered it for herself because if she stopped saying okay, she was going to have to admit that nothing was okay, and she couldn't afford to do that right now. She couldn't afford to fall apart on a sidewalk in the middle of Chicago while her daughter stopped breathing in her arms. She had called 911 7 minutes ago. The operator had been kind, calm professional, asking the right questions. Nina had answered them as best she could while running. Yes, the baby was conscious. No, she couldn't tell if her lips were turning blue because it was dark. Yes, she was moving toward the intersection on Michigan Avenue. Yes, she understood they were sending someone. Yes. And then she had waited for the siren. She was still waiting. The dispatcher had explained 3 accidents on the expressway. A warehouse fire on the south side, every available unit was committed. They were trying. Someone was coming. Just stay on the line. Nina had hung up and kept running because staying on the line wasn't going to breathe for her daughter. The cab app had failed twice. First attempt, no drivers available in your area. Second attempt, the app crashed before she could confirm a pickup. Her neighbor, Mrs. Calloway from the 3rd floor, had opened her door 6 inches, seen the rain-soaked woman with the struggling baby and said, "I can't get involved in other people's emergencies. Honey, I've got a bad heart," and closed the door again. Nina had stood in that hallway for exactly 2 seconds. She'd counted those 2 before she turned and ran for the stairs. She had $34 in her wallet. She had tried flagging 3 cabs on the street. 2 didn't stop, 1 slowed. Looked at her, really looked at her, a soaking wet black woman in a cheap coat, holding a bundled baby in the rain, and accelerated. Northwestern Memorial was 14 blocks away. In good weather, in good shoes, with nothing in her arms, Nina could have run it in 12 minutes. Tonight, it might as well have been on the other side of the planet. Rosie made a sound then. Not a cry. Not even close to a cry. It was a thin, reedy wheeze, the kind of sound that a tiny chest makes when it's working 3 times as hard as it should just to pull in a breath. Nina had heard that sound once before 6 months ago when Rosie had her first RSV scare. The pediatrician had explained it then, when the airways narrow, when inflammation sets in, when a body that small has to fight that hard, just to breathe every second becomes a calculation. Nina had memorized that explanation the way people memorize prayers. She knew exactly what that sound meant. She ran faster. She came around the corner into a major intersection. 4 lane signal lights, a momentary break in traffic, and that was when she saw them. A convoy of 3 black SUVs moving in tight formation, the kind of precision that didn't belong to ordinary people. They were slowing for the red light ahead, maybe 50 yards away. Big vehicles, expensive. The kind of vehicles that had drivers, not owners who drove themselves. Nina didn't think. She ran straight into the intersection. Her sneaker hit a puddle, and her left foot slid sideways. She caught herself without going down. Pure adrenaline keeping her upright, and she planted herself directly in front of the lead SUV with both arms out. Rosie pressed against her chest, and she screamed. Not words, not at first, just sound, the raw animal sound that comes out of a person when everything civilized has been stripped away and what's left is pure desperation. The SUV stopped. Of course it stopped. Even the most dangerous men in the world don't run over a woman standing in front of their car screaming in the rain. Not in public, not on a lit intersection with security cameras on every corner. The front passenger door opened immediately. A man got out, and he was not a small man. 6'2", broad across the shoulders, wearing a dark suit that was immediately going wrong in the rain, with the flat assessing eyes of someone who had been trained to identify threats for a living. He moved toward Nina with a kind of deliberate, unhurried purpose that was somehow more frightening than if he had rushed. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the vehicle," he said. His voice was even, professional, like he did this 3 times a week. "My daughter," Nina said. "She can't breathe. I need a ride to Northwestern. It's 14 blocks, please. Just 14 blocks. I'll get out anywhere you want. Just please." Step away from the vehicle. Same tone, same eyes. "She's 1 year old," Nina said, and her voice broke on that cracked right down the middle. "She's 1 year old and she can't breathe. And I've called 911 and they can't come and she doesn't have time. Please, I'm begging you. I am begging you." The bodyguard reached for her arm, not violently, clinically, the way you move an obstacle. And something in Nina, something she hadn't known, was still there, locked into place. She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She looked at this enormous man reaching for her arm, and she stood her ground on that rain-soaked street, and she said very quietly, "If you touch me right now, I will lay down in front of this car and you will have to run me over." She meant it. He could see that she meant it. He paused. The back window of the lead SUV went down 2 inches. One voice, low, controlled, without any discernible emotion at all. "Marcus, what is the situation?" It wasn't a question, it was a request for data. The bodyguard Marcus answered without turning his head. "Woman in the road, claims to have a sick child, requesting transport." 3 seconds of silence. "Move her off the road." Marcus reached for Nina's arm again. This time Rosie made the sound. That thin, reedy, working too hard wheeze that Nina had memorized 6 months ago in a pediatrician's office. Except this time it was worse. This time it was slower. And then for a moment that lasted approximately 400 years, it stopped altogether. Nina looked down at her daughter. Rosie's eyes were partially open. Not alert open. Not looking at something open. That terrifying, unfocused, where am I going open that a parent only sees in their worst nightmares. "No," Nina said. "No, no, no, baby, no." She didn't scream it. She said it like a prayer. She said it like if she said it correctly, it would be enough to keep her daughter here. She started doing what the pediatrician had shown her, tilting Rosie's head, slightly clearing the airway, watching for that small, stubborn chest to rise again. Marcus had stopped moving. Inside the SUV, through the 2 inches of open window, there was the sound of a phone being set down on leather. Then the door opened. Not the window going down further, not Marcus receiving an instruction. The door of the lead SUV opened, and the man who stepped out of it was not what Nina was expecting. Not that she had been in any condition to expect anything in particular, but she had imagined someone older perhaps, or more visibly powerful, the loud, demonstrative kind of powerful that announces itself. Adrian Moretti was none of those things. He was somewhere in his early 40s, and he wore that age the way some men wear expensive suits. Not self-consciously, but with kind of settled authority. Dark hair cut short, silvering at the temples. A face that might have been considered handsome once, and probably still was, but had accumulated something along the way. Not lines exactly, more like a careful absence of expression. As if he had decided at some point that his face was something that happened to him rather than something he used. He was not wearing a coat despite the rain. His suit, charcoal perfectly fitted, was getting soaked, and he appeared not to notice or care. He walked toward Nina and Rosie, not fast, not urgently, with the measured, deliberate pace of a man who has never needed to hurry because the world has always waited for him. He stopped 2 feet away and looked at the child in her arms. Just looked. Nina was already looking at him, but he wasn't looking back at her. He was looking at Rosie, at the small chest that was struggling, at the unfocused eyes, at the color or the absence of it in a baby's face that should have been flushed pink from the cold. "How long has she been like this?" he said. 20 minutes, Nina said. "Maybe more. She had a cold and then it got worse so fast. I've never seen it get worse that fast. She has a history of respiratory." "How old?" 13 months. He looked at Rosie for another moment. Nina could not read his face. She had spent 11 minutes running through this city looking for human beings who could find it in themselves to care whether her daughter lived or died. And this man was standing in front of her in the rain, and his expression was giving her absolutely nothing. "Marcus," he said. "Sir." "Open the rear door of the second vehicle." A pause, small, barely there, but Nina caught it. Marcus was surprised. He recovered immediately. "Yes, sir." Then Adrian Moretti looked at Nina, directly, for the first time. "Get in the car," he said. And there it was, not warmth, not compassion, not even basic human decency expressed in any form she would have recognized. Just an instruction delivered with the complete certainty of a man who had never in his adult life issued an instruction that wasn't followed. Nina didn't move for a single second because her brain running on adrenaline and fear, and 11 minutes of cold rain needed 1 second to catch up. Then she moved. She was inside the SUV before Marcus had fully opened the door, settling into the warm leather interior, holding Rosie against her chest, trying to assess whether her daughter's breathing had improved at all in the last 60 seconds. The door closed behind her. She heard the front passenger door close, felt the vehicle begin to move. Adrian Moretti had not followed her into the second vehicle. He had returned to his own. His voice came through what she assumed was some kind of intercom, or possibly one of the men in her vehicle was receiving an earpiece instruction. "Northwestern Memorial. Clear the route." She heard the lead SUV, his vehicle, on the phone. A single sentence, medical priority, clear Michigan northbound. She didn't know what that meant, or who he was calling, or how one man's phone call cleared a city street. She found out approximately 90 seconds later when the convoy accelerated through a green light that had been green for an unusually long time, and then another, every light on that corridor holding green as if they had been waiting for this specific convoy, which she would later understand they had. In the backseat of the second SUV, with a driver who had not spoken a single word and another suited man in the passenger seat who might as well have been a statue, Nina held her daughter and rocked her and whispered, "Okay, okay, okay, okay." And Rosie's chest kept working. Not well, not the way it should, but working, still fighting, still here. She should have been grateful. She was grateful. But there was something else threading through the gratitude, something her body knew before her mind caught up to it. She had no idea whose car she was in. She had run into traffic and stopped a convoy and begged a stranger for help, and she had gotten it. She had gotten it, which was more than anyone else in this city had offered her tonight. But she had not asked in the chaos of those seconds who this man was. She had not asked why these vehicles moved in formation. She had not asked why the traffic lights cooperated. She had not asked why a man who had told his bodyguard to remove her from the road had then opened his own door and looked at her daughter and made a decision. She had not asked any of those questions. She asked one of them now to the back of the passenger seat in front of her because she needed to ask someone. "Who is he?" she said. The man in the passenger seat did not answer. The man in the other car, who is he? Silence. Not hostile silence. Just total professional practiced silence. The kind of silence that is itself an answer. Nina looked out the window. The rain was still falling. The city was going by at a speed she didn't associate with legal driving. She held Rosie tighter. She thought, "I am in a car with people who won't tell me who their employer is." She thought, "My daughter is still breathing." She thought, "I'll ask the other questions later." The convoy arrived at Northwestern Memorial Emergency in 4 minutes and 17 seconds, a trip that would have taken 12 minutes under normal conditions. The vehicles stopped directly in front of the emergency entrance, not in the drop-off zone, but at the door itself, and the doors were open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Nina was out of the car with Rosie before the man in the passenger seat had completed whatever protocol he was performing. She hit the emergency room doors at a run. "My daughter, she can't breathe. She's 13 months. The triage nurse was already moving toward her, already calling a name behind her, already doing the practice rapid assessment that good emergency nurses do in the first 3 seconds. Someone took Rosie from Nina's arms with a gentleness that under any other circumstances might have made her fight them. But tonight felt like the most profound act of mercy she had ever experienced. They took Rosie through a door. The door closed. Nina stood in the emergency waiting room, soaking wet, $34 in her wallet, 11-minute run in the rain, canvas sneakers going cold against linoleum, fluorescent lights overhead that had the specific quality of lights that have seen too much suffering to be warm about it. She stood there and she realized that she was shaking not from cold, though the cold was real, from the sudden absence of running, from the terrible empty helplessness of having done everything she could and now having to wait. Ms. Whitmore, she turned. Adrian Moretti was standing 6 feet behind her. He had not been there a moment ago, or perhaps he had, and she had simply been too overwhelmed to register him. He was still in his wetsuit. His face was still doing that thing, that careful, total absence of readable emotion, and he had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at her with the patient, assessing quality of someone who was waiting for information. "How did you know my name?" she said. "You told the triage nurse." She had. She remembered now. It felt like it had happened in another lifetime. "They took her back already," Nina said. That's good, right? Triage means they thought she was... It means they assessed her quickly," Adrian said. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "You're going to fall down if you don't." She almost argued. She looked at the waiting room chairs, the hard-bolted down kind, that emergency rooms always have, as if someone long ago decided that sick people's families don't deserve comfort. And she sat down because her legs had apparently agreed with the man in the wetsuit, even if her mouth hadn't. He did not sit down. He stood where he was and took out his phone, and Nina assumed he was done with her. He had done what he'd done, whatever that was, whatever impulse or calculation or fluke of human feeling had made him open that car door, and now he was back to being whoever he normally was. She heard him speak very quietly into the phone. "Dr. Reyes, I need you in the ER pediatric respiratory 13 months. I don't want her to wait." A pause. "I'm not asking." Another pause. "I know what time it is." He ended the call. Nina stared at him. "Who was that?" He looked at her for a moment. "Someone who will make sure your daughter is seen by the right people. You can't call a doctor and make them..." "I'm aware of what is and isn't typically possible," he said, and something in the way he said it closed that particular door in a way that didn't invite further questions. He went back to his phone. Not a social withdrawal, something more like a tactical repositioning. Nina watched the door that Rosie had gone through. 4 minutes passed. 5, 6. A doctor, young, slightly breathless, clearly arrived in a hurry, came through the main entrance and went directly to the nurse's station. Nina watched him speak to the charge nurse. Watched the charge nurse look up and point at the door Rosie had gone through. Watched the doctor go through that door without stopping at reception, without filling out a single form. She looked at Adrian Moretti. He was still on his phone, still not looking at her, still doing whatever it was he did. "Why are you still here?" she asked. He looked up, just briefly. "Because you're not." She didn't know what that meant. She was too tired and too scared and too wet to unpack it, so she filed it away in the part of her brain she'd deal with later, the part that was already filling up with questions. 12 minutes after Rosie had been taken through that door, a nurse came out and asked Nina to sign some forms. Insurance information, medical history. Nina answered what she could, skipped in what she couldn't sign where she was told to sign. The nurse leaned toward her just slightly and said, "The child is receiving care. The physician who was called in, he's one of the best pediatric pulmonologists in the city. She's in good hands." Nina said, "Thank you," because she had run out of more complicated words. She went back to her chair. The wet sneakers were starting to make her feet ache with cold. She pressed her hands together between her knees and stared at the floor. She heard Adrian Moretti cross the room and stop beside her. She didn't look up. He set something on the chair next to her. She looked. It was a cup of coffee vending machine. Coffee, the terrible kind that tastes mostly like ambition, and it was hot. She could see the steam. She looked up at him. He was already walking toward the window, his back to her, phone in hand. She picked up the coffee, wrapped both hands around it, felt the heat work its way through her palms. She said thank you quietly, to his back. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave. And Nina Whitmore, sitting in a hard plastic chair in a Chicago emergency room at 11:47 at night, $34 in her wallet and canvas sneakers, soaked through to the soul, began to understand, not completely, not even mostly, but in that first foundational way that precedes actual understanding, that something had shifted in the world tonight. Something small and quiet and enormously consequential. She had stopped a convoy in the rain, and the man inside it had not driven around her. She turned the coffee cup in her hands and watched the door Rosie had gone through and counted, because counting helped. And she thought about the phone call she had heard him make, the lights that had held green, the doctor who had come through the door without stopping at reception. And she understood that she had no framework for what any of that meant, or who this man was, or why he was still standing by that window when he clearly had places to be and people to command and a life that had nothing to do with wet women and bad sneakers. But Rosie was behind that door, and Rosie was still breathing. So Nina Whitmore held the terrible vending machine coffee and kept counting and waited the way mothers wait, which is to say, without any real alternative for someone to come through that door and tell her which side of tonight she was going to end up on. Across the room, Adrian Moretti stood at the window and watched the rain and said nothing and went nowhere. His reflection in the glass gave nothing away, but his feet stayed exactly where they were. The coffee went cold before Nina finished it. She had been sitting in that chair for 41 minutes. She knew because she had been counting again the way she always counted when she had nothing else to hold on to. 41 minutes since Rosie had gone through that door. 41 minutes since a doctor she had never met had been summoned by a phone call she wasn't supposed to hear. 41 minutes of fluorescent lights in linoleum and the distant sound of a city that didn't know or care that her entire world was behind a set of swinging doors. Adrian Moretti had not moved from the window. That was the thing she kept coming back to. He had not sat down. He had not left. He had not made any further gesture toward her. No more coffee, no words, no acknowledgement that she existed in the same room as him. He stood at that window with his phone in his hand and his wetsuit and his completely unreadable face, and he was simply there the way a wall is there. Solid, present, offering nothing beyond the fact of itself. Nina had tried not to look at him. She had failed repeatedly. At minute 43, she stopped trying to pretend she wasn't watching him and just watched him, because she needed to understand something, and looking away wasn't helping her understand it. She had lived in Chicago her whole life. She had grown up in Englewood, moved to Pilsen when Rosie was born, worked double shifts at a hotel downtown for the past 8 months, cleaning rooms that cost more per night than she made in a week. She knew this city. She knew its textures, its sounds, its particular species of hard men, the ones who were hard because life had made them that way, and the ones who were hard because they had chosen it, because hardness was a tool they had picked up somewhere along the way and decided to keep. She had known men from both categories. She could usually tell the difference. She could not tell with Adrian Moretti which kind he was, and that bothered her in a way she couldn't entirely name. At minute 47, she said, "You don't have to stay." He didn't turn from the window. "I'm aware. I mean, whatever you did calling the doctor, the lights on the way here, I appreciate it. I'll find a way to—" "Don't." He said it the same way he said everything else. Flat, final, like a door closing. Nina felt something flicker in her chest that was not gratitude and not fear. Something closer to irritation, which surprised her because she had spent the last 47 minutes being grateful and terrified in equal measure, and irritation was not a feeling she had budgeted for tonight. "Don't what?" she said. He turned from the window then, looked at her directly the way he had on the street, that full assessing look that made her feel like she was being read rather than seen. "Don't tell me you'll find a way to pay me back. Don't calculate what you owe. Don't turn this into a transaction before we know if the child is—" He stopped. One beat. "Before we know more." It was the first time she had heard him stop mid-sentence. She filed that away too. "Then what am I supposed to do with it?" she asked. "Sit there," he said. "Drink the coffee. The coffee is cold." Something moved across his face. She would have sworn it was almost a reaction, not quite a smile, nothing that generous, but the shadow of an acknowledgement that she had said something that deserved one. Then it was gone. He turned back to the window. Nina looked at the cold coffee cup in her hands. She drank the rest of it anyway because her body needed the caffeine and her pride could not currently afford to be selective. At minute 52, a nurse came through the swinging doors, and Nina was on her feet before the woman had taken 2 steps into the waiting room. Ms. Whitmore. Yes, that's me. How is she? How is Rosie? She's stable, the nurse said. And Nina's knees did something complicated that she controlled only by locking them. She's responding well to the bronchodilator treatment. Dr. Reyes ordered a full panel. He wants to rule out secondary infection. But her oxygen levels are coming up. She's fighting. Nina put her hand over her mouth. Can I see her? Not yet. Another 20-30 minutes. We want her levels consistent before we move her to a room. The nurse touched Nina's arm briefly, the practiced, genuine kindness of someone who has delivered news in both directions and learned to be present for all of it. She's going to be okay. It was close, but she's going to be okay. Nina nodded, kept nodding. Her eyes had gone wet, and she was not going to cry in this waiting room. She had made that decision sometime around minute 30, and she was sticking to it. The nurse left. Nina stood in the middle of the waiting room with her hands still over her mouth facing the swinging doors. From behind her, Adrian's voice, "Good news." She turned. He was watching her, not the window. Her. "She's stable," Nina said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. "Oxygen improving. Dr. Reyes." She stopped. "How do you know a pediatric pulmonologist well enough to call him at midnight?" A pause. Precise, calculated, long enough to tell her he was deciding what to say. "I fund the pediatric wing," he said. Nina blinked. "You?" "The Moretti Pediatric Center, 3rd floor. The name on the building that was part of the donation terms." He said it the way you say something that is technically true and completely misleading at the same time, and he said it without any apparent interest in whether she found it satisfying or not. "Dr. Reyes takes my calls." "Because you pay for his department." "Because I pay for his department," he confirmed. Nina looked at him. "What kind of businessman funds an entire pediatric wing?" "The kind who writes large checks," he said. "Sit down, Ms. Whitmore. You've been on your feet for 12 hours. "How do you know how long I've been on my feet?" "Your shoes," he said simply. "Canvas. November. You've been standing in them since morning." She looked down at her shoes. At the water-stained canvas, the worn-through sole on the right heel that she'd been meaning to replace for 2 months. She looked up at him, and she felt that irritation again sharpened now into something more specific. He had cataloged her poverty in a single glance, not cruelly, not with any visible judgment, but with the same efficient attention he probably gave to everything, and somehow that was worse than cruelty. "I don't like being assessed," she said. "I know," he said. "Sit down anyway." She sat down, not because he told her to, because the nurse had said 30 minutes, and her legs had heard 52 minutes before that, and were putting in their own vote. The waiting room was quiet. A television mounted in the corner was playing the news on mute, the closed captions scrolling too fast for anyone to follow. Somewhere down a corridor, a child was crying. A healthy, full-throated cry, the kind that meant nothing was wrong, and Nina felt her whole body release something at the sound of it. After several minutes, she said, "Why did you stop?" Adrian from across the room without looking up from his phone. "What?" "On the street, you told the man to move me off the road. Why did you stop?" A silence. Longer than his other silences. "The child stopped making noise," he said. "That's it. That's it." Nina watched him. "People stop making decisions based on children's sounds all the time," she said. "Nobody stopped for me for 11 minutes of running through this city." "I'm aware of what other people did," he said. "I can only speak to what I did." "And why did you get out of the car yourself? Why not just have the driver take me?" He looked up from his phone, met her eyes. "Because I needed to see," he said. "See what one beat, whether it was real." She stared at him. "You thought I was faking it." "I considered the possibility." "She's a baby, my daughter. I was running through a rainstorm. I am a man," he said very quietly, very evenly, "who has had people use children to get close to me before." The room went still. Nina heard what he had just said, heard not just the words, but the thing underneath them, the thing that had made those words possible, the experience that had built that specific suspicion into a reflex. She heard it and she felt the irritation shift into something more complicated. "That happened to you," she said. "Someone actually used a child." He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. He looked at her for 3 seconds, then looked back at his phone. I verified, he said. I was satisfied the situation was genuine. I made a decision. That is the complete accounting. Nina understood for the first time clearly that he was not going to give her more than that. Not tonight. Possibly not ever. This man had exactly one setting, and it was controlled, and she was not going to get behind it by asking direct questions. In some part of her, the part that had grown up in Englewood and knew better than to push at things that pushed back, recognized that and filed it away. She said, I am Nina. He looked up again. Slight pause. I know. You keep knowing things I haven't told you. You told the nurse. You also called someone on at my daughter's bedside before I signed a single form. Something shifted, barely a microscopic adjustment in the quality of his attention. Adrian, he said, and offered nothing else. Last name, context, explanation, none of it. Adrian, she repeated. It felt strange in her mouth, like a word in a foreign language she was trying to pronounce correctly. Thank you. For all of it. The lights, the doctor, She stopped. I don't have a way to repay any of this. I didn't ask you to. I know you didn't. I'm telling you anyway because I need you to understand that I'm not the kind of person who takes without. Ms. Whitmore. His voice cut clean and flat across hers. Not unkind, just precise. Like a scalpel that doesn't know it's causing pain. The next 20 minutes, the only thing that matters is whether your daughter's oxygen levels stabilize. Everything else is noise. Deal with the noise later. Nina closed her mouth. He was right. She hated that he was right. She filed that away too in the growing collection. 23 minutes later, the nurse came back and said Nina could come through. She was out of her chair and at the door before the nurse had finished the sentence. Behind her, without planning to, she looked back. Adrian was watching the door she was about to go through. Not her. The door. And his face, for just a fraction of a second, she was not sure she had actually seen it. She would not have been able to prove it in any court, had something in it that was not the absence of feeling. Something that looked briefly and improbably like relief. Then he looked back at his phone and she went through the door. Rosie was in a room at the end of a short corridor in a hospital crib that was approximately 3 times too large for her, hooked to a monitor that beeped with a specific regular rhythm that Nina had decided was the best sound in the entire world. She had a small oxygen cannula and an IV line, and she was awake, not fully, not alert, but present. Her dark eyes open and drifting, looking at the ceiling with the mild, unfocused interest of a child who has been through something and come out the other side, too tired to know exactly where she is. Nina pulled up the chair beside the crib and put her hand through the bars and touched Rosie's hand. Rosie's fingers closed around hers. Immediately, instinctively, the way infants do, that reflexive grip that has been there since before anything else. Nina put her head down on the rail of the crib and she cried. Quietly, completely, with her whole body, the way you cry when you have been holding something for a very long time and the container finally gives. Dr. Reyes found her that way 4 minutes later. He was a slight man in his early 50s with the quality of stillness that belongs to people who have delivered difficult news enough times to know that stillness is a gift. He waited for her to look up before he said anything, and when she did, he explained what had happened: severe bronchospasm triggered by the cold and a viral infection that had been building for days. The kind of cascade that in a child this small can escalate to critical within an hour. He explained what they had done, what they were continuing to do, what the next 12 hours would look like. He said she was brought in at exactly the right time. 10 minutes more would have been a different conversation. Nina nodded. She already knew that. She had known it on the street in her bones, which was why she had stepped in front of a convoy of black SUVs in the rain. But hearing it from a doctor made it simultaneously more and less real. Is there anything you need? Dr. Reyes asked. Family you want me to call? Someone who can come be with you tonight? No, Nina said. There's no one. It's just us. He nodded with the particular gentleness of a man who has heard that sentence before and learned not to respond to it with pity. He said he would check back in 2 hours. He said the nurses had her number. He said Rosie was going to be fine. He left. And then it was just Nina and Rosie in the room with the beeping monitor and the too large crib and the IV line and the tiny hand wrapped around Nina's fingers. Nina sat there. And then, because she needed to know, because her brain was slowly coming back online after running on pure adrenaline for the last hour, and it was starting to ask questions that it had been too scared to ask before she took out her phone and she typed 2 words into the search bar: Adrian Moretti. She stared at what came back. She read it for a long time. She set the phone face down on her knee and looked at her daughter's chest rising and falling in the steady, monitored, almost normal rhythm that 20 minutes ago she would have given anything to see. The man in the waiting room was not a businessman who happened to fund a pediatric wing. He was not the kind of man you stopped on a rainy street and begged for a favor. He was not anyone she should have gotten into a car with, should have allowed to make phone calls on her behalf, should have accepted coffee from, should have learned the first name of. Adrian Moretti was, according to 4 separate news articles, a federal investigation, and a Chicago Tribune piece from 3 years ago with the headline Shadow Empire, the Untouchable Moretti Network, a name that moved through the city's financial and criminal infrastructure the way water moves through walls, quietly, pervasively, without leaving clean evidence of how it got in. The Tribune article was careful. It said alleged several times. It said sources familiar with the matter. It said Moretti declined to comment, but it listed things, the kind of things that well-funded lawyers keep out of courtrooms, but cannot keep out of the investigative journalism of a patient reporter that assembled into a picture Nina could read clearly. She sat with that picture. Then she turned her phone back over and looked at it for another minute, and she put it in her pocket, and she looked at Rosie, and she thought about the moment on that street when the door of the SUV had opened and this man had come out in the rain and looked at her daughter with those careful, unreadable eyes and said, "Get in the car." She thought about the traffic lights. She thought about Dr. Reyes coming through the door without stopping at reception. She thought about this coffee cup left on the chair without a word. She thought about him still being in the waiting room. She stood up, pressed a kiss to Rosie's forehead, and told her daughter she would be right back. Rosie's fingers tightened briefly around hers, then released a tiny act of trust that cost Nina something she didn't have a name for. She walked back through the corridor and pushed through the swinging doors into the waiting room. Adrian was exactly where she had left him, standing, window, phone in hand. He heard her come in. She knew because his posture shifted a microscopic adjustment, the kind that bodies make when they become aware of someone entering a room. "She's okay," Nina said. "She's stable, breathing on her own mostly. They're going to keep her overnight at minimum." He turned, looked at her. Something in his face moved in that barely there way, not relief this time. Something she still didn't have a word for. "Good, Maid," he said. "I looked you up," she said. He didn't react, didn't tighten, didn't shift, just looked at her with the same steady, unreadable attention. "All right. You're not just a businessman." No. She had expected deflection, denial. At minimum, the careful hedging of a man accustomed to lawyers. She had not expected that single syllable delivered without apology and without performance. "No," she repeated. "No," he confirmed. Nina stood in the middle of the waiting room in her soaked canvas shoes with $34 in her wallet and her daughter breathing steadily 2 corridors away. And she looked at the man who had stopped a convoy for a baby he had never met, and she said, "What do you want?" Something shifted in his face. Real this time. Not relief, not the shadow of a reaction, something sharper and more genuine, almost like he'd been caught off guard, which she suspected did not happen to him with any frequency. "I don't want anything," he said. "Men like you always want something." "Men like me," he repeated. His voice was still even, but it had a new quality, not offense, not defensive, but something careful in it, like he was picking the words up and examining them. "What do you know about men like me?" "I grew up in Englewood," Nina said. "I know exactly what kind of man keeps a convoy of 3 armored SUVs and has traffic lights cleared on a phone call. I know what that means and what it costs other people, and I know you don't do what you did tonight for nothing." He looked at her for a long time, longer than any of his other silences. The waiting room hummed around them, distant sounds, muted television, the building breathing. "Once was enough," he said. She stared at him. "What does that mean?" He looked away, back to the window. The rain had let up outside. She could see it in the way the glass reflected differently. The slick surface of the street outside, no longer moving. "It means," he said, "that once was enough for me to decide I was going to make sure that the next time there was a different outcome." He didn't explain further. Nina stood there with that sentence and turned it in her mind the way she'd turned the coffee cup, feeling for its shape. Next time. Different outcome. which meant there had been a first time. A time when there had been no different outcome. A time when someone, a child, a baby, she thought something in her bones was certain of it, had not made it through those emergency room doors in time. She did not ask. She would have asked almost anyone else. But she did not ask him because she could see that he had already given her something by saying that much. Something it cost him in a way she couldn't quantify, and she was not going to reach for more than he had offered. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay. I'm going to go back to my daughter," she said, "but I need to ask you something first." He waited. "When we leave here," she said, "what happens? You go back to your life and we go back to ours, and tonight was just a thing that happened, right?" He considered her. His face was doing the careful, closed thing again, but something underneath it in the quality of how he was holding himself had a different texture than it had had on the street on the way here in the early part of this waiting room. Something that was not warmth, not that, not yet, maybe not ever, but was less like a wall than it had been. "Get some sleep, Ms. Whitmore," he said. "We'll discuss what happens after your daughter is breathing on her own." It was not an answer. It was the frame around an answer, the shape of something that had not yet been said. Nina looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned and went back through the swinging doors. She did not check to see if he was still there when she left. She didn't need to. She already knew. She slept in the chair beside Rosie's crib. Not well, not fully. The kind of sleep that happens in pieces, 20 minutes here, 30 there, interrupted by the beep of monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses doing their rounds, in the particular vigilance of a mother's body that does not fully release its watch even when the mind gives out. Nina would surface from sleep, reach through the crib bars to touch Rosie's hand, feel the warm, solid breathing presence of her daughter, and sink back under. By 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely. She sat up in the chair and rolled her neck and listened to the monitor and watched Rosie's chest rise and fall with the steady, almost normal rhythm that the night before had felt like a miracle and now felt like the most ordinary and precious thing in the world. Ordinary and precious. She had not understood until this moment that those two things could be the same. At 5:15, a different nurse came in to check vitals. Young, efficient, with the particular alertness of someone on the tail end of a night shift who was running on professionalism and coffee. "Oxygen is holding at 96, the nurse said, marking something on a tablet. "Dr. Reyes will be in for morning rounds around 7. If the levels stay where they are, he'll talk to you about a discharge timeline." She paused, looked at Nina with a brief assessing glance. "There's a fresh set of clothing in the bathroom. Someone left it at the nurse's station for you last night." Nina stared at her. "Someone left bag from a store on Michigan, your size apparently, and breakfast is being delivered to the room at 6. The nurse said it all with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting weather conditions, and then she was done checking vitals and moving toward the door. "Who left the clothing?" Nina asked. The nurse paused at the door. "The gentleman who was in the waiting room. He left around 2 a.m., asked the charge nurse to make sure you had what you needed. Then she was gone." Nina sat with that for a long time. He had left at 2 in the morning. He had been in that waiting room for more than 2 hours after she had gone back to Rosie's room, standing at that window with his phone saying nothing to nobody. And before he left, he had made arrangements, clothing, food, without telling her, without asking what she needed, without making it into a gesture she was supposed to notice and be grateful for. He had just done it. Like infrastructure. Like someone who solves problems the way other people breathe automatically without making a production of it. Nina went to the bathroom and opened the bag. Dark jeans, her size exactly. A plain gray sweatshirt, soft in a way that spoke of quality without announcing it. Socks. A pair of clean sneakers, not canvas, not cheap, that were, when she tried them, also exactly her size. She stood in the hospital bathroom holding a pair of sneakers that a man she had known for 4 hours had purchased in the middle of the night and had delivered to a nurse's station without a note, without his name attached, without any mechanism for her to thank him. She put them on. They fit perfectly. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The woman who had run through the rain last night, who had stepped in front of a convoy, who had begged a stranger for her daughter's life, and she did not recognize the face entirely. It was her face, but it had gone through something. The way metal goes through heat. Still the same material, but different in structure. She went back to the chair beside Rosie's crib. At 6 o'clock exactly, a hospital aide brought breakfast. Not cafeteria food, not the standard tray with the covered plate and the institutional coffee. Real food. A warm meal from a restaurant still in its container with coffee that smelled like it had been ground that morning. 2 portions Nina noticed. One for her. One smaller, a container of soft fruit and a sippy cup of apple juice. For Rosie when she was ready. Nina ate without tasting it, but she ate all of it. At 7:03, Dr. Reyes came in for rounds. He checked Rosie with the thorough, unhurried attention of a man who takes his work seriously, and then he sat down across from Nina and he told her the honest version. She's responding very well. Better than I would have predicted given her presentation on arrival. The bronchospasm has resolved significantly, and the viral panel came back rhinovirus, which is manageable. We'll continue the breathing treatments through the morning and reassess. He paused. I'd like to keep her through today and tonight. If she continues this trajectory, we can talk about discharge tomorrow morning. Okay, Nina said. That's good. That's okay. Ms. Whitmore? He said her name the same careful way he'd said it the night before, the way you say a name when you're about to say something the person needs to actually hear. I want to talk to you about follow-up care. Rosie is going to need a pulmonologist monitoring her on an ongoing basis. This episode indicates a predisposition that will require management, not alarm, but active management. That means regular appointments, a rescue inhaler plan, potentially a specialist for a full respiratory workup. Nina nodded. She was already doing the math she did not want to do. Okay. Mr. Moretti's office contacted the hospital this morning, Dr. Reyes said. He said it the same way he said everything else, evenly, without attaching anything editorial to it. They've arranged for Rosie's care here to be fully covered, and they've set up a pediatric pulmonology follow-up at this facility at no cost. Nina went very still. He did that, she said. His office called at 6 a.m., Dr. Reyes said, before I came in for rounds. Nina looked at Rosie, who had woken slightly and was watching the ceiling with the mild, interested expression of a child who has no idea what any of the adults around her are doing and is largely fine with that. I didn't ask him to do that, Nina said. No, Dr. Reyes said. I know, he stood. I'll check back at noon. After he left, Nina sat very still for several minutes. She thought about what it meant that a man's office was making calls on her behalf at 6 in the morning. What infrastructure that required. What it said about the kind of organization that man ran, that there were people whose job it was to execute his decisions before he finished making them, that the distance between Adrian Moretti deciding something and that thing being done was approximately 0. She thought about the news articles on her phone. She thought about Rosie's chest rising and falling. She picked up her phone and she did something she had never done before in her life. She called a number she had not been given, that she had found in the results of a search, a general line for a holding company that one of the Tribune articles had listed as Moretti's legitimate business front. It rang twice. A man answered. Moretti Group. I need to speak with Adrian Moretti, Nina said, a pause. I'm sorry, who's calling? My name is Nina Whitmore. He'll know who I am. 30 seconds of hold music classical understated the kind of hold music chosen by people who want you to know their hold music has taste. Then Ms. Whitmore, his voice. She had not been prepared for how immediately recognizable it would be. Flat, precise, carrying that quality of total absence of performance. You paid for everything, she said. The hospital bill, the follow-up. Yes. I didn't ask you to. No. Adrian. She said his name the same careful way she'd said it in the waiting room, feeling its weight. I need you to understand something. I am not a charity case. I am not someone's project. I have been taking care of myself and my daughter for 13 months without. I know that. Then why? Because the bill would have bankrupted you, he said, and that serves no one. A pause. And because Rosie needs follow-up care that you cannot currently afford. And if she doesn't get it, she ends up back in that emergency room in 6 months. And the next time the circumstances may not be, he stopped. That same mid-sentence stop she had heard once before. Favorable. Nina sat with that word. Favorable. As if last night had been a matter of favorable circumstances. As if she had not run 11 minutes through a rainstorm and thrown herself in front of a moving vehicle to make those circumstances happen. What do you want from me? She asked again. The same question she had asked in the waiting room, because she still didn't have the answer and she needed it. I told you last night, nothing. Nobody does what you've done for nothing. Then file it under something you don't have a category for, he said, and let the doctors take care of your daughter. The line went quiet. Not dead, she could hear the slight ambient sound of wherever he was, the distant quality of a large space. I grew up in Englewood, she said. You know what that means. I have a general understanding. Then you know that where I come from, debt to a man like you is not something you carry lightly. It doesn't just go away because the person says it does. This is not that kind of debt. How do I know? Silence. Long enough that she thought for a moment the call had dropped. Then, you don't, not yet. Another pause, and his voice shifted, not softer exactly, but different, less flat. But you know what your daughter's chest sounds like when it's failing. And you know what it sounds like right now. Hold on to that. The rest is noise. Nina closed her eyes. She hated that he kept saying the right thing. She hated it in the specific, exhausting way you hate something that is both true and inconvenient. I'll call you when we're discharged, she said. A beat. All right. She ended the call. At 9:47 that morning, while Rosie was sleeping and Nina was on her second cup of real coffee, Marcus appeared in the doorway of the hospital room. Not Adrian. Marcus, the bodyguard, the large suited man who had reached for her arm on the street and then stopped when Rosie made the sound. He stood in the doorway with the particular posture of a man who is very large and is trying to take up less space than he occupies, which is a specific kind of effort that Nina recognized and despite herself respected. Ms. Whitmore, he said. Marcus, she said. She watched him register that she knew his name. What do you need? Mr. Moretti asked me to stop by. Make sure you had everything. He held up a bag. Phone charger. He noticed yours was cracked, Nina finished. She had broken the charging port 2 weeks ago and been managing with a borrowed cable since. He noticed that? He notices things, Marcus said. He said it without affect, the way you state a fact of physics. Come in, Nina said. He came in, set the bag on the windowsill, new charger, and she could see the corner of what looked like a pharmacy bag, children's medicine, she assumed, and then he stood at a respectful distance and looked at Rosie in the crib with an expression that surprised Nina. Not professional blankness. Something else. Something with texture. She looks better, he said, than last night. You were looking at her last night. I drove the second vehicle, he said. I was aware of the situation. Nina studied him. You've worked for him a long time. 11 years. Then you know who he is, what he does. Marcus looked at her steadily. I know who he is. Is he a good man? The question landed in the room and just sat there. Marcus didn't answer immediately, and she respected that. A fast answer would have told her nothing. A considered one might tell her something. He's a complicated man, Marcus said finally. Who does good things for reasons that are not always simple? He paused. Last night was not the first time he has done something like this. You said that like there's a specific story behind it. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, just slightly. That's not my story to tell. But there is one. Ms. Whitmore. He looked at her directly and she saw in his face something she had not expected from a man whose job was physical intimidation, sincerity. Plain, uncomplicated sincerity. Whatever you're trying to figure out about him, you're going to have to figure it out from him. I will tell you one thing because I was there last night and I think you deserve to know it. He paused. When Rosie stopped breathing on the street, when she went quiet, he was out of that car before he decided to be out of it. You understand what I mean? There was no calculation. His body was already moving. Nina looked at him. He told me it was a security assessment, she said. He told you a lot of things, Marcus said. Some of them were even true. He picked up the empty bag, folded it precisely. The charger's the right model. The pharmacy bag has a pediatric saline spray, helps with the congestion. My daughter had the same thing when she was small. He turned to leave. Marcus, Nina said. He stopped. Thank you for stopping on the street. He looked at her over his shoulder. I almost didn't. But you did. He nodded once and left. Nina sat with everything that had just happened, the charger, the pharmacy bag, the 11 years the body already moving, and she turned it all slowly the way you turn an object in different lights to understand its shape. At 12:04, Dr. Reyes came back for the noon check. Rosie's levels were holding at 97. He was satisfied. He adjusted one of the medications and said the same thing he had said at 7 if this continued tomorrow morning was possible. Nina spent the afternoon talking to Rosie, not about anything meaningful. Baby talk, the running commentary that parents provide to infants who understand none of the words and all of the tone. She told Rosie about the nurse's scrubs, which were purple. She told her about the shape of the ceiling light. She sang 2 songs badly and one surprisingly well. Rosie watched her with the ancient, interested gravity that babies have, tracking her mother's face the way young things track the sun. By 4 in the afternoon, Rosie was awake enough and stable enough to be irritable, which Dr. Reyes had told her was, in his professional opinion, an excellent sign. "She's mad," Nina told the nurse during the 4 o'clock check over Rosie's increasingly indignant vocalization. "She's really mad." "Good," the nurse said simply, "but it means fighting." At 4:47, Nina's phone rang, unknown number, different from the one she had called this morning. She answered. "Ms. Whitmore." A woman's voice, crisp, professional, efficient. "My name is Diane. I work with Mr. Moretti. He asked me to reach out regarding your current living situation." Nina sat up straight at her. "My living situation. We understand you rent in Pilsen. We've confirmed the hospital stay will run at minimum through tomorrow. Mr. Moretti would like to ensure that when your daughter is discharged, she's going to a safe and stable environment." A pause. "He has a property on the north side. It's secure, fully staffed, quiet. He would like to offer it to you for a transitional period while Rosie continues to recover." Nina's hand tightened on the phone. "He wants us to stay in his house," she said flatly. "A property he owns," Diane clarified. "He does not reside there. It would be entirely your and your daughter's space. There would be support staff available, a nurse who specializes in pediatric care, a housekeeper, security on the perimeter." "Security," Nina repeated, "standard for any of his properties." Nina stood up from the chair and walked to the window because she needed to move, because this conversation was pushing something in her that needed physical outlet. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, keeping her voice even and low so as not to disturb Rosie. "A man I met on a street last night at 11 p.m. wants me to move my 13-month-old daughter into one of his properties with staff and perimeter security. He was emphatic that you are not being asked to make any commitment or agreement," Diane said. "He specifically said to tell you," a slight pause, the pause of someone reading from a note, "that your only job is to let Rosie recover. Everything else is logistical." Nina pressed her forehead against the window glass. The city was out there. Chicago, gray-skied and cold, going about its enormous, indifferent business. Somewhere out there was her apartment in Pilsen, with the broken charger and the worn carpet and the space heater that she ran carefully, because she monitored the electric bill, and the crib she had bought secondhand and scrubbed until it was clean, and the life she had been building with nothing except her own 2 hands and an absolute refusal to ask for more than she could eventually repay. And here was a voice on the phone offering her something she had no framework for. Something that wore the shape of help but lived in a neighborhood she had never intended to visit. "Tell him," Nina said, "that I'll give him an answer when my daughter is discharged." "Of course," Diane said. "He expected that." She hung up. She turned back to the room. Rosie had quieted and was looking at her with those dark eyes, that ancient infant attention. "What do you think?" Nina asked her daughter. Rosie made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite nothing. Something in between, which felt under the circumstances exactly appropriate. At 6:17 that evening, Adrian Moretti walked through the door. Not Marcus, not Diane. Him. He had changed clothes, different suit, still dark, still perfectly fitted, still communicating the same fundamental information about who he was and what kind of world he occupied. He was carrying nothing. He stopped just inside the doorway the way Marcus had, with that same awareness of presence, of taking up space in a room that was not his. He looked at Rosie first. He always looked at Rosie first, Nina realized, every time. The child before anything else. Rosie looked back at him with the solemn, evaluating stare that babies reserve for new faces, the primal sorting process of very young humans, deciding whether a person is safe. After approximately 6 seconds, Rosie made her sound again. The not quite a word, something in between sound. Something moved in Adrian Moretti's face. Nina had been watching for it, for any crack, any fracture, in that controlled, careful surface, and she saw it happen in real time. Something came up through the control and showed itself briefly and unmistakably before going back under. Not sentiment, not softness. Something older than both of those things. Something that had been buried for a long time and was not entirely comfortable being disturbed. He walked to the side of the crib. He stood there and looked down at Rosie. And Rosie, with the terrifying, instinctive accuracy of small children, reached up one hand through the crib bars toward him. Nina stopped breathing. Adrian Moretti looked at the small hand for a moment. Then very carefully, with a precision that was the same precision he brought to everything but felt in this context, like it was costing him something, he extended one finger. Rosie's hand closed around it. The monitor beeped. The IV line ran. The city moved outside the window. Adrian stood at the crib rail with his daughter's hand with Rosie's hand. Nina's daughter's hand wrapped around his finger, and his face did something she had no words for at all. Something that was not the absence of feeling. Something that was unmistakably and undeniably the presence of an old and specific grief rising through the surface of a man who had spent years building that surface, specifically to keep this kind of thing from happening. He stood there for 11 seconds. She counted. Then gently he withdrew his finger, straightened, looked at Nina. His face was closed again, back to baseline, but she had seen it, and he knew she had seen it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. "Your office called," Nina said quietly. "I know." "The property on the north side?" "Yes." She looked at him, at this man who had once been moved in a way he did not want to be moved by something she could still only partially see. At this man who had stepped out of a convoy in the rain for a child he had never met, and had spent the night in a hospital waiting room, and had made calls at 6 in the morning, and sent clothing and food and a charger and a pharmacy bag, and who was now standing at the crib rail of her daughter with an old grief moving in his face like weather. "Tell me what happened," she said. "The first time. The time you said once was enough." He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, which was 17 hours by her count, which was 17 hours longer than she had ever expected to know him, he did not deflect, did not redirect, did not deliver a precise and minimal answer designed to give her information without giving her access. He stood at the rail of her daughter's crib, and he said, "Her name was Sophia," and the room went very still. Her name was Sophia. 3 words, 4 syllables, and in them an entire world that Nina had not known existed until this moment, a world that explained everything she had seen in this man's face over the last 17 hours and could not name. Adrian did not sit down. He stayed at the rail of Rosie's crib, standing the way he always stood, with that contained, upright posture of a man who does not allow himself the vulnerability of settling. But something in his voice had changed. Not broken. She did not think this man broke, not visibly, not in ways that other people could measure, but different, like a frequency shift barely perceptible that you felt in your chest before your ears registered it. "She was 2 years old," he said, "my sister's daughter, my niece." Nina stayed very still. She had learned in the last 17 hours that stillness was the right response to Adrian Moretti offering something. Any movement toward it, any reaching, and he would close. "My sister Elena, she had a difficult life, different choices than me, same circumstances that made them." He paused. The monitor beeped steady and patient. "She lived on the west side. She called me one night. Sophia had a fever that had been climbing for 2 days. Elena didn't have a car. Her building's elevator was broken. The neighbor she knocked on, nobody answered." Nina felt the shape of the story before he finished it. She felt it in her sternum. "She called me," Adrian said. "I was 40 minutes away. I had cars. I had men. I had every resource that exists in this city." His jaw tightened slightly. "I was in the middle of something. I decided I could not leave. I told her to call 911. I told her someone would come." The room was so quiet. "Someone came," he said. 23 minutes later, it was too long. He said it without drama, without the theatrical weight that people sometimes put around devastating sentences to signal that you should feel them. He said it the way you state a thing that has been so thoroughly integrated into the structure of your daily existence that it no longer needs decoration. It simply is. "Sophia died," Nina said. "Sophia died," he confirmed. "Bacterial meningitis. The kind that moves fast. The kind where 23 minutes is the difference." A pause. "She would have been 7 this past April." Nina pressed her hand flat against her own sternum, a physical response to something that had no other outlet. Adrian. Don't, he said. Same word he had said to her in the waiting room on the first night. But different now, not the flat controlling don't of a man shutting down an unwanted dynamic. Something more exposed. Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. People have been telling me that for 5 years, and it has not yet become true. She hadn't been going to say that. She had been going to say his name and nothing else because sometimes that is the only honest thing. But she kept that to herself. My sister, he said. Elena, she doesn't speak to me. She moved. I know where she is. I make sure she's taken care of financially. That's the one thing she accepts because she has 2 other children and she is practical enough to take it. But she doesn't speak to me. And she is correct not to. You don't know that, Nina said. He looked at her. I was 40 minutes away with 3 cars and 12 men, and I made a calculation. And my niece died. His voice was even, terribly precisely even. I know that. Nina looked at Rosie, who had fallen asleep again, with the abrupt totality that infants achieve one moment present and the next entirely gone into sleep, her small chest moving in the steady rhythm that had come to feel over the last 19 hours like a personal promise. Last night on the street, Nina said. Yes. You saw it again. I heard it, he said, her breathing, and then the silence. He looked at the crib, and I was not going to make the same calculation twice. Nina understood now. All of it, the whole architecture, the cars, the lights, the doctor, the waiting room, the clothing and the food, and the charger and the property on the north side. She understood the shape of it. It was not charity. It was not power exercised for its own sake. It was not despite what she had initially feared the opening move of a man who wanted something. It was a man trying to rewrite a moment that could not be rewritten, doing for a stranger's child what he had not done for his sister's child. Not because it would change anything, he was too clear-eyed for that kind of thinking, but because he had decided that the world contained one fewer version of that night, one fewer child who went silent in the wrong moment, in the wrong city, with the wrong people standing close enough to help. Once was enough, she said softly. Once was enough, he said. They boldly stayed in the quiet of that for a moment. The monitor beeped. Rosie slept. Then something shifted in Adrian's posture, not much, but Nina was learning to read the small gradations of this man's body language, the way you learn to read a language with very few words. He was pulling back from what he had just shared. Not regretting it, she thought, but reestablishing the distance that was his default, the controlled perimeter that he needed in order to function. The property on the north side, he said. The offer stands. I know it does, Nina said. I told Diane I'd answer after discharge. And she looked at him, at the man who had just handed her the most unguarded thing she suspected he possessed and was now standing at the rail of her daughter's crib asking about real estate logistics. She almost smiled. She did not because it would have been the wrong moment. I need to think about it, she said. I need to think about what it means to say yes to you. It means your daughter recovers in a safe place, he said. It means I'm in your world, she said, and I don't know your world. You know more about it than most people who enter it. Because I looked you up. Because you're paying attention, he said. And there was something in the way he said it, not quite approval, not quite surprise, but some precise combination of both, that told her it was not a quality he encountered often. People who paid attention to Adrian Moretti usually did so from a great distance for reasons of self-preservation. I'll give you an answer tomorrow morning, she said, when Dr. Reyes comes for rounds. He nodded once and left. No goodbye, no parting instruction. He was simply there and then not there, which she was beginning to understand was how he moved through the world present with total authority, absent with the same. She sat back in the chair. She looked at Rosie sleeping. She thought about Sophia, who would have been 7 in April. She did not sleep. At 7:49 the following morning, Dr. Reyes came for rounds and told Nina that Rosie's oxygen levels had held through the night at 97 and 98. The bronchospasm had fully resolved and the viral load was responding well. He was satisfied. He signed the discharge paperwork at 8:15. Nina dressed Rosie in the clean clothes that had been in the pharmacy bag Marcus had brought. Someone had anticipated this too, had known she would need clothes for her daughter at discharge, had included them without being asked. She noted this. She noted all of it. The ledger in her head kept growing, and it was not a comfortable ledger to carry. She called Adrian at 8:22. He answered on the second ring. Dr. Reyes cleared her, yes. Good. Adrian, she paused, organized the words she had spent the night arranging. I'm going to say yes to the property. For Rosie. Not for me. I want to be clear about that because I need you to understand that my answer would be different if it were only about me. Understood. I have conditions. A brief pause. Tell me. I work. I have a job at the Marriott downtown. I'm going back to work Monday, regardless of where we're staying, so I need to know that Rosie's care during my shifts is actually competent, not just available, actually competent. I need to meet whoever the nurse is before I agree. That's reasonable. Second, I come and go as I choose. No one follows me. No one reports to you on my movements. No one monitors my phone. Whatever security exists on that property is for Rosie, not for surveillance of me. Also reasonable. She had expected friction on that one. His easy agreement made her recalibrate slightly. Third, this is temporary, 2 weeks maximum. I'll have the medical situation stabilized, and I will find alternative arrangements. This is not a permanent solution. 2 weeks, he said. Yes. And if Rosie needs more than 2 weeks too, we'll address that when we get there, Nina said firmly. But I'm not walking into this without an exit. You're not walking into anything, he said, and his voice had the quality of someone saying something that is precisely true and also carries more weight than the words alone. You're making a practical decision for your daughter's recovery. That's all this is. Is it? She said. A pause. What else would it be? She didn't answer that. She wasn't ready to answer it, and she suspected he knew that, and she appreciated in the complicated, reluctant way she was appreciating most things about this man that he didn't push. I'll have Marcus pick you up at 9, he said. If that works? That works, she said. She hung up. At 9:03, Marcus pulled up to the hospital entrance in a single black SUV, not the convoy, just one car, which she understood was a concession of some kind. She put Rosie in the car seat that had been installed correctly. She checked because she always checked and got in beside her daughter. Marcus drove north. He didn't make small talk, which she appreciated. She sat beside Rosie and watched the city go by and did the things she always did when she was scared counted. The blocks, the traffic lights, the distance between where she was and every version of where she might end up. The property was a townhouse on a quiet street in Lincoln Park. From the outside, it was understated, no gates, no visible security, the kind of place that does not announce itself. Inside, it was clean and warm and furnished with the particular taste of someone who valued quality over display, every object chosen to function and last rather than to impress. A woman was waiting inside, early 60s small with the efficient, warm competence of someone who has spent decades being useful. She introduced herself as Carol. I'm the housekeeper, Carol said, and I've been here 12 years, so if you need to know where anything is, I'm your person. And the nurse, Nina asked? Patricia. She'll be here at noon. Former NICU nurse, 22 years at Children's Memorial. Carol said it without fanfare, just information, but Nina felt the weight of those credentials like something solid. She's good with small ones. Very calm. Nina looked around the main room. Rosie was on her hip, taking in the new space with wide, evaluating eyes. Is he here? Nina asked. Adrian. No, Carol said. Mr. Moretti doesn't stay here. He has his own residence. She paused. He called this morning to make sure the room was set up correctly. For the baby. Nina looked at Carol. He called personally. He did. Carol's face was neutral professional, but there was something in it, the particular softness that accumulates in a person who has watched someone do the same careful, unacknowledged thing for a long time. He usually does when it matters to him. Nina carried Rosie upstairs. The room that had been prepared for them was large and clean, with a proper crib that was the right size, not a hospital crib, a real one. The kind you put in a nursery and a child monitor on the dresser and blackout curtains on the windows and a small humidifier running already because someone had known that was what a child recovering from a respiratory episode needed, and a rocking chair beside the crib. Nina stood in the middle of that room and held Rosie and looked at the rocking chair. She thought about her apartment in Pilsen, the second-hand crib, the space heater she ran carefully. The $34. She thought about a man standing at a phone at 6 in the morning, calling to make sure the room was set up correctly. I don't know what we're doing, she told Rosie quietly. I want you to know that. I don't have this figured out. Rosie looked at her with those dark, ancient eyes. But you're breathing, Nina said, so that's enough for right now. She put Rosie in the crib and stood beside it with her hand on the rail, the way she had stood beside the hospital crib, and she let herself feel for the first time since she had started running through the rain 3 nights ago, the full weight of what had almost happened. She didn't cry. She had already done that in the hospital room thoroughly and completely, and she was not a person who needed to do things twice. But she stood there, and she breathed, and she let it move through her, the terror, the relief, the grief of the near miss, the particular vertigo of a life that has come within 10 minutes of being permanently different. Then she picked up her phone and called her supervisor at the Marriott and arranged to return on Monday. Then she called her landlord and told him she would be out of the apartment for approximately 2 weeks for a family medical situation. Then she sat in the rocking chair and composed a list in her head because she had always been better at mental lists than written ones of everything she needed to do to make this temporary, to keep it temporary, to ensure that in 14 days she walked out of this house with her daughter and her independence intact. The list was long. She started at the top. At 12:01, Patricia arrived. She was exactly what Carol had said, small calm with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in environments where panic is contagious and stillness is therefore a professional skill. She sat with Rosie for 20 minutes, just sat with her, talking quietly, letting the baby get used to her presence before she did anything clinical. Nina watched from across the room and felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. She's doing well, Patricia said after her assessment. The residual congestion will clear over the next few days. I'd like to do breathing checks every 4 hours for the first 48, then we can go to every 8 if she's trending well. She looked at Nina directly. You look like you haven't slept. I slept in a hospital chair for 2 nights. Go rest, Patricia said. I'll be here. I don't... Ms. Whitmore. Patricia's voice was gentle and firm in equal measure, the combination that NICU nurses develop because it works. Your daughter is safe and monitored. You cannot take care of her if you are not taking care of yourself. Go rest for 2 hours. I will call you if anything changes. Anything. Nina looked at Rosie, who was currently subjecting Patricia's stethoscope to a thorough examination with both hands. She went to the room that had been prepared for her. She lay down on the bed, a real bed with real sheets, not a hospital chair. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She slept for 3 hours. When she woke, it was to the sound of Rosie's voice down the hall, the full, indignant, I am inconvenienced vocalization of a child who had decided she was done being sick and was communicating this position to anyone within range. Nina was out of the bed and down the hall before she was entirely awake, the mother's alarm fully intact even through 3 hours of real sleep. Patricia was in the chair beside the crib, completely unruffled, talking to Rosie in the calm, matter-of-fact way that apparently worked on babies who were lodging complaints. I know, Patricia was saying. I hear you. You've made your feelings very clear. Nina stood in the doorway. She's been doing that for 20 minutes, Patricia said, looking up. Oxygen is 98. She's protesting, not struggling. There's a difference. The faintest smile. She's got a strong opinion about something. She has strong opinions about everything, Nina said. She went to the crib and picked her daughter up, and Rosie immediately grabbed a fistful of Nina's sweatshirt and made a sound that was definitively categorized as complaint achieved. She's hungry, Patricia said. I wasn't sure what you wanted me to offer her. Nina settled into the rocking chair with Rosie reaching for the bag she had brought from the hospital. I've got her. Patricia quietly left them alone. Nina sat in the rocking chair in the room that had been prepared by a man who called personally to check the setup, and she fed her daughter and she listened to the house around her room, moving in the kitchen, the distant sound of the street, the hum of the city that was always there, the background note of Chicago that you stopped hearing after a while and only noticed when it was absent. At 4:43, her phone buzzed. A text, unknown number, but she knew whose it was before she opened it. How is she? Not a question, a statement with no punctuation, the kind of message sent by someone who is asking but is not comfortable with the asking. Nina looked at it for a moment, then she typed back loud, which apparently is good. 3 minutes passed. Then, yes, it is. She looked at that for another moment. At those 3 words, brief, precise, carrying more than their weight in the way that his words always did. She typed, "Thank you," for the room, the rocking chair. His response came faster this time, which she noticed. Carol handles the details. Carol said you called personally. A longer pause this time, 30 seconds. Then she talks too much. Nina smiled. She did not intend to. It arrived uninvited the way real smiles do, and she let it stay for a moment before it faded. She typed, "The rocking chair was the right choice." No response for 2 minutes. Then finally, "I know." She set the phone down, looked at Rosie, who had finished eating and was now examining Nina's face with the concentrated attention of someone conducting important research. "I know," Nina said softly, repeating his words back to no one, thinking about what it meant to know specifically that a woman sitting in a strange house with a sick child needed something to rock in. What accumulation of observation and attention produced that specific knowledge? She was still thinking about it when Carol knocked softly on the door and said that dinner was ready whenever she wanted it. Nina put Rosie in the crib awake but contained experimentally tolerating the situation and went downstairs. The kitchen table was set for one. Proper setting, proper food, the kind of meal that required actual cooking. Nina sat down and ate it and felt against every instinct that told her to resist feeling comfortable in this house, the specific bone-deep relief of someone who has been surviving for a very long time on not enough of anything being given something sufficient. She hated how good it felt. She hated how much she needed it. At 7:16, her phone rang. Adrian. Voice call this time? She answered. "She's good," she said before he could ask. "Patricia is excellent. The room is good. It's fine." "You sound surprised," he said. "I'm calibrating," she said. "To what?" She thought about how to answer that. "To a situation I didn't plan for." "No one plans for the situations that matter," he said. She sat with that. "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "Most things worth knowing come that way," he said. A pause, and then something shifted in his voice, not warmer exactly, but less defended in the way that phone calls sometimes allow the slight loosening that comes from not being seen. "You should know I have a situation developing this week. Business. I may not be reachable at all times." "You don't need to be reachable to me," she said. "I'm not your responsibility." "Rosie is my responsibility," Wendell said. "By choice, Austrian." "Not an argument," he said quietly. "A statement. I choose it. You don't have to understand why right now." She didn't argue. She was learning when not to argue with him, which she recognized was a skill she should perhaps be more careful about developing. "The business situation," she said. "Is it dangerous?" A pause, the precise length of a pause that is deciding how much truth to offer. "It requires attention." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I'm giving," he said, and then quieter. "Marcus will be on the street. Around the clock, not for surveillance, for the perimeter. If you need anything and you can't reach me, he is your first call." She understood what he was telling her. He was walking into something, and he was making arrangements before he did. She felt something she had not budgeted for this evening. Something that sat in the upper chest, near the collarbone, that was not gratitude and not fear, and not the complicated irritation she had been using as a defense mechanism. Something closer to worry. "Be careful," she said. She said it before she decided to, which meant it was real. A pause on his end, longer than most. When he spoke again, his voice had the quality of something that had been handled very carefully before being offered. "I'll try," he said. He ended the call. Nina sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house on the quiet street and held the phone in both hands and looked at the wall. Carol came in to clear the dishes. She looked at Nina's face and didn't say anything, which was, Nina thought, a quality in Carol that explained why she had lasted 12 years in Adrian Moretti's employ. "Does he do this often?" Nina asked. "Put people here." Carol collected the plate, the glass, the utensils with the efficient calm of someone who has had this conversation or something like it before. "He's helped people before," she said carefully, "in different ways." "But not like this," Nina said, not a question. Carol paused, set the dishes back down, looked at Nina with the directness of a woman in her 60s who has long since stopped softening things that don't need softening. "No," she said, "not like this." Nina nodded. Carol picked up the dishes again. At the kitchen door, she stopped. He's not a simple man, Ms. Whitmore. I've worked for him long enough to know that the things he does and the reasons he does them don't always look the same from the outside. She paused. But I've never seen him get out of the car himself. In 11 years, not once. She went into the kitchen. Nina sat at the table. Wow. She thought about what it meant not once in 11 years, and she thought about Sophia, who would have been 7 in April, and she thought about a man standing at a crib rail with an old grief moving in his face like weather that has nowhere else to go. She thought about what it cost a person to keep a grief like that contained for 5 years, what it did to the container. She went back upstairs. She sat in the rocking chair in the dark beside Rosie's crib, listening to her daughter breathe, counting the steady, sufficient, miraculous rhythm of it. Outside somewhere on the quiet street, Marcus was at his post. And somewhere in the city, Adrian Moretti was walking into something that required attention. And Nina Whitmore sat in the chair he had chosen and rocked in the dark and did the one thing she had always done best, the one thing that had gotten her through everything up to and including the last 72 hours. She held on. She counted 7 days. 7 days in the Lincoln Park townhouse. And Nina Whitmore had developed a precise internal map of its rhythms, the same way she had always mapped every environment she inhabited, not because she was paranoid, but because she was practical. And practical. People know that understanding a place is the first step to not being owned by it. Carol arrived at 7 every morning and left at 6 every evening. Patricia came at 8 and stayed through dinner doing her breathing checks with the quiet efficiency of someone who genuinely loved her work. Marcus was on the street every morning when Nina looked out the window. A different car. Each day she noticed that too, the way the vehicles rotated, but always Marcus, the same steady, large presence that she had stopped finding, threatening sometime around day 3, and had started finding against her better judgment, reassuring. Adrian had not come to the house. He had texted. Once on day 2, how is she? And she had answered, better, loud. And he had sent back the word good and nothing else. Once on day 4, a different kind of message. Patricia's assessment goes to my office. I've reviewed it. And she had stared at that for a full minute at the image of this man sitting somewhere in his controlled, dangerous life, reading a pediatric nurse's notes about her daughter's oxygen levels and recovery trajectory. And she had not known what to do with the feeling that produced. She had typed back, you don't have to do that. He had typed back, I know. On day 5, she had gone back to work. She had stood in the doorway of Rosie's room at 6:45 in the morning, watching Patricia settle in with the monitor in the assessment chart, in the calm, unflappable competence of 22 years in a NICU, and she had told herself 3 times that this was fine, that Rosie was safe, that leaving her daughter in the care of a qualified professional in a secure house while she went to work was not failure. It was, in fact, the thing she had built her entire adult life around being able to do: function, provide, keep moving. She had told herself all of that, and then she had gone downstairs and put on her Marriott uniform and walked out the front door. Marcus had been at the car, not the SUV, a plain sedan, dark blue anonymous. He had the door open before she reached it. She had stopped. I take the train. I know, he said, but it's 6:50 a.m. and it's 31 degrees. She had looked at him, at his face, which had the particular quality of a man who has been given an instruction and is waiting to see whether it will be accepted peacefully or not. She had gotten in the car. He drove her to the Marriott without speaking. When she got out, she said, I'll take the train back. I'll be here at 4, he said. She had opened her mouth. Ms. Whitmore, Marcus said patiently, looking straight ahead through the windshield. It's 31 degrees. Please don't make me explain this to him. She closed her mouth, went to work. The Marriott was the same as it had always been, the routine of it, the physical certainty of rooms that needed cleaning and a body that knew how to clean them, the particular exhaustion that comes from honest physical work and is in its own way a kind of rest. Her co-workers asked if Rosie was okay. She said yes. They said good. The world continued. At 4 o'clock, Marcus was at the curb. She got in without argument. On day 6, the same. Day 7, the same, a rhythm establishing itself before she had authorized it, the way all rhythms do, quietly, incrementally through repetition. On day 7 evening, sitting in the rocking chair after Rosie's last feeding, Nina did the accounting that she had been doing in pieces since the night in the hospital and now needed to do in full. She did it the way she did all hard things directly without looking away. She had been in this house for 7 days. She had 4 days before her self-imposed 2-week limit, 4 days to figure out the next step. Her apartment in Pilsen was still hers. She had paid that month's rent before everything happened, which meant she had until the end of the month. She had her job. She had Patricia's follow-up schedule, which ran for 6 more weeks, appointments at Northwestern that Adrian's office had arranged, and that she had not yet figured out how to pay for independently, because the arrangement as it stood had everything routed through the Moretti account, and she had not yet found a mechanism to redirect it. That was the problem she needed to solve. She picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the first ring, which was different from before. She noted it. "I need to talk to you about the follow-up appointments," she said. "All right." His voice was flat measured. She had learned to hear the gradations inside the flatness. This one was tired. Not dramatically, not complain about it tired. Just the texture of a man who had been doing something demanding for several days and was not done yet. "You've been paying for everything," she said. "The hospital, the staff here, the appointments." "Yes. I need to know what it costs, the appointments, specifically so I can build a payment plan." A pause. Nina. Something shifted in her chest at the way he said her name. Not Miss Whitmore, not the careful professional address he had maintained for the first several days. Just her name said with a specific kind of quiet that she had not heard from him before. "I'm not asking you to write it off," she said. "I am asking you to give me the number so I can—" "I'm not going to give you the number," he said. "Not because you don't deserve to have it, because the number is not the problem we should be discussing right now." "Then what is the problem we should be discussing?" Another pause, and then something she had not anticipated. "Can I come tomorrow?" Not "I'm coming tomorrow." Not an instruction, not an announcement, a question. She heard what that cost him in the quality of the silence before it, in the precise neutrality he was trying to maintain around a thing that was not neutral. "Yes," she said. "He came at 10 in the morning." Carol let him in. Nina heard his voice in the entrance, quiet, exchanging a brief word with Carol, and then his footsteps on the stairs, unhurried, measured the specific sound of a man who walks like he means every step. He appeared in the doorway of Rosie's room. Rosie was on the floor on a blanket, conducting her ongoing physical research into the properties of a plastic stacking ring, and she looked up at Adrian with the same solemn, evaluating stare she had given him in the hospital. The same 6-second assessment. And then with the decisive speed of a child who has made up her mind, she held the stacking ring out toward him. An offering. Adrian crouched down to her level. He did it fluidly, without hesitation, which surprised Nina. She had expected a man of his posture and containment to be uncomfortable on the floor of a child's room. He was not. He crouched down and he took the stacking ring from Rosie's hand with a gravity appropriate to receiving something of great value. Rosie watched him hold it. Then she made her sound the not-quite word, the something in between, and reached for it back. He gave it back. Rosie immediately offered it again. Nina watched this transaction repeat 3 times, and she watched Adrian Moretti's face during it, watched the controlled closed surface develop in the presence of a 13-month-old, with a stacking ring, a series of small fractures, each one letting through a degree more of whatever was underneath than the last. On the 4th exchange, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. A quarter of one, but real, unmistakably, undeniably real. Nina felt it land in her chest like something falling into place. She looked away because watching felt like trespassing. "She's recovered well," Adrian said from the floor. "Patricia says she's ahead of the expected trajectory," Nina said. "Her lungs are clear. The follow-up in 2 weeks is precautionary at this point." He nodded, stood, looked at Nina with the direct assessing quality that she had stopped finding threatening and now simply found him. This was how he looked at things, fully, without flinching. "You said you wanted to talk," Nina said. "Yes." "Then talk." He looked at her for a moment. "You're leaving in 4 days." "That was the agreement." "I know it was." He moved to the wall, leaned against it with his arms crossed, not defensive, she had learned, but his version of settled. "I'm not asking you to change it." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking what you need," he said, and specifically, "to go back and be stable." "What does that look like?" Nina stared at him. "What I need?" "Yes." "Adrian, I'm not offering charity," he said, and his voice had an edge to it, not anger but precision, the edge of someone, cutting through something before it gets complicated. I am asking a logistical question. You are going back to a situation that was 4 days before we met sustainable by a small margin. That margin is now different because Rosie has a 6-week follow-up schedule and a recovery period that requires. I know what it requires, Nina said sharply. Then tell me what you need. She turned away from him, walked to the window, stood with her back to him for a moment, doing the thing she hated most, accepting that someone else had correctly identified the problem she had been trying to solve alone for 7 days and asking to be part of the solution. She turned back. The follow-up appointments, she said, 6 weeks. I can handle the co-pays if they're restructured through a payment plan. I've already called Northwestern's financial office, and they have a program. That program has a 14-week approval process, he said. She stared at him. How do you know that? Because I looked into it, he said simply. Like it was obvious. Like, of course, he had looked into the payment plan timeline at Northwestern Memorial's financial assistance office. The appointments start in 2 weeks. That's a gap. She opened her mouth, closed it. I can bridge the gap, he said. As a loan, terms you set, whatever interest rate makes it feel like a transaction rather than a gift. I don't care about the money, Nina. I care about the gap. She looked at him. At the man who had told her he didn't care about the money with exactly the same tone he might use to say he didn't care about the weather, not dismissively, but genuinely the way a person is dismissive of a thing that has never been their actual concern. You're serious, she said. I am always serious, he said. And then almost so quiet, she caught it only because she was already listening for the small things, especially about this. She sat down in the rocking chair. Not because she needed to sit, but because she needed a moment. I don't know how to do this, she said. Whatever this is, I don't know the rules. There are no rules, he said. There are always rules. Then we make them, he said. Here, now, you tell me what you're comfortable with, and I tell you what I can offer, and we find the place where those two things overlap. She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had appeared on a rainy street 4 days ago, no, 8 days ago now, and had rearranged through a sequence of actions she was still only partially able to account and for the entire shape of the week. Why, she said, not what do you want, not what's your angle, just why. He understood the distinction. She could see that he understood it in the way his face registered the question, not as a challenge, but as the real thing it was. Because Sophia was 2 years old, he said, and Rosie is 13 months, and I was 40 minutes away with 3 cars, and I made a calculation. He looked at his hands for a moment briefly. Just a glance the way you look at something you've been carrying for a long time and are tired of the weight of. And I have spent 5 years in a world where the only currency is power and leverage, and I have been very good at accumulating both. And none of it, he stopped. None of it changed a single thing about a single night. The room was very quiet. Rosie had tired of the stacking ring and was lying on her back on the blanket, studying the ceiling with philosophical interest. You're trying to, Nina said softly, change something about that night. I know I can't, he said. I'm not delusional. Sophia is not. He stopped again, pressed through it. What happened, happened, but there are other nights. There are other women running in the rain, and I have the ability to make those nights different. So, one word carrying the weight of a decision made 5 years ago and maintained every day since, in the face of a grief that had not resolved and would not. So you stopped the convoy, Nina said. So I stopped the convoy. She looked at him, he looked at her. Rosie provided editorial commentary from the blanket, a series of sounds that expressed no particular position on the matter. The loan, Nina said. Yes. I'll pay you back in 18 months, market interest rate. I want documentation, a real contract, not something casual. Done. And I want Patricia's contact information independently, so that if anything changes with the situation between us, Rosie's care doesn't get caught in the middle. Also done. And I need you to understand that when I leave this house in 4 days, I am not disappearing. I'm not. She paused, organized the words carefully because they mattered, and she needed them to land correctly. I am not ending whatever this is. I don't know what this is, but I'm not ending it. He went very still. She had surprised him. She saw it happen, the brief, genuine disruption of his composure, the micro-expression of a man who had not planned for that sentence and was processing it in real time. "All right," he said, after a moment. "I'm telling you that," she said, "because you're going to offer something practical and structured, and I'm going to accept it, and then in 4 days I'm going to leave this house, and I need you to know that both of those things can be true simultaneously, that the leaving is not a rejection, that I am just," she spread her hands, "I am just a person who needs to do things her own way." "I know that," he said. "You knew it from the street." "I knew it from the street," he confirmed. "And you helped anyway." "And I helped anyway." She stood up from the rocking chair, crossed to where Rosie was on the blanket, and picked her up, her warm, solid, breathing, opinionated daughter, who immediately grabbed Nina's collar and attempted to make her case about something urgently and incomprehensibly. Nina looked at Adrian over Rosie's head. "Stay for lunch," she said. He blinked. She had the satisfaction of watching Adrian Moretti, who had not visibly blinked at anything in the entire duration of their acquaintance, actually blink. "Carol made too much," Nina said. "She always makes too much, and it's a thing she does." He looked at her, then at Rosie, who had transferred her attention and her urgent, incomprehensible case to Adrian, and was making direct eye contact with him from the security of her mother's arms. "All right," he said. They ate at the kitchen table. Carol appeared to assess the situation with the practiced eye of 12 years set a third place and retreated to the kitchen with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose work has proceeded according to plan. It was not a comfortable lunch. It was not an easy lunch. There were silences, long ones the kind that in other company would have been awkward, but between these two people were simply pauses. Spaces where words weren't needed because the situation was too new and too complicated for easy conversation, and both of them were too honest to perform one. But Adrian Moretti ate at that kitchen table. He answered when Rosie made sounds at him, which she did repeatedly and with great confidence. He drank Carol's coffee, black, no ceremony. He sat in a house that was his, but had never been inhabited like this by anything warm and ongoing and loud, and he did not look like a man who was tolerating something unfamiliar. He looked like a man who was cautiously and without the vocabulary for it yet beginning to recognize something. After lunch, he played with Rosie on the blanket for 11 minutes. Nina counted because she counted everything, and because those 11 minutes were the kind of thing that deserved counting. He was not graceful with children in the way that some people are naturally graceful. He was deliberate, careful, paying close attention to her cues, responding when she offered the stacking ring, withdrawing when she turned away, respecting the baby's rhythms the way he respected everything else he took seriously, which was, it turned out, completely. Rosie fell asleep at 12:47, mid-offer, the ring extended in her hand, eyes closing in the abrupt total way, and was gone. Nina caught the ring. She looked up. Adrian was looking at the sleeping baby. His face had done the thing again. The fracture, the grief-like grief moving through the old loss and the new almost loss and everything in between. But there was something else in it now, something that was not quite peace, because peace was not a word that applied easily to this man. Something closer to the beginning of permission. A man who had been carrying a 5-year weight, deciding incrementally and without announcement that the weight could be set down, not disappeared, not resolved, just set down for a moment. He stood. "I should go," he said. "I know," Nina said. He went to the door of the room and stopped, stood with his back to her for a moment, the same way he had stood at the waiting room window on the first night. "Nina, yes, the contract will be with you by end of week. Proper documentation, your terms." "Thank you." A pause, and then with the specific, careful delivery of a man who does not say things he does not mean, "She's going to be fine." Not a question, not reassurance in the empty performative sense. A statement of information, the way he stated everything as a fact he had assessed and found reliable. "I know," Nina said. He left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs. The brief exchange with Carol, the front door. She sat in the rocking chair beside her sleeping daughter. The house settled around her, the monitor beeped steady and clean. Rosie's chest rose and fell in the rhythm that Nina had come to understand over the course of 8 days was the most important rhythm in the world. 4 days later, Nina Whitmore packed 2 bags. She was systematic about it, her things, Rosie's things, the carefully separated categories of what had come here with her and what belonged to the house. She left nothing she hadn't brought except the sneakers because the canvas ones were gone, and she had worn the new ones every day since, and returning them would have been a gesture of a specific pride she no longer felt entitled to. Carol stood at the bottom of the stairs. "You know you can call," Carol said. "I know," Nina said. "About anything." Carol pressed a card into her hand, her personal number, not the household line. "I mean it. Not Mr. Moretti's office. Me." Nina looked at the card, looked at Carol. "You've done this before, given someone this card." "Twice," Carol said, "in 12 years. And the other 2 times," Carol smiled. Small, genuine, the smile of a woman who has kept confidences for a long time and is good at it. "They're fine," she said, "both of them." Marcus drove them to Pilsen. He carried the bags to the door. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold and looked at Nina with those steady, measured eyes. "His number," Marcus said. He handed her a card. "That one goes through any time." "I have his number," she said. "That one is different," Marcus said. "That's the one that doesn't go through the office, the one that he checks himself." He paused. "I've worked for him 11 years. He gave me this number on my second day. He has given it to 4 other people in 11 years. He stopped. 5 now." Nina looked at the card. Plain, just a number, no name, no title, no Moretti Group letterhead. She put it in her pocket. "Marcus," she said, "Ms. Whitmore. Take care of yourself, not just him." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face that was not quite surprise and not quite not surprise. "I'll try," he said. The same words Adrian had used on the phone 9 days ago. She took Rosie inside. The apartment was cold. She had turned the heat down before the hospital, and it had been 2 weeks. She turned it back up. She put Rosie on the floor on her coat while she got the portable heater running and checked the refrigerator empty as expected, and assessed the space with the returning eye of someone who has been gone long enough to see it clearly. It was small. The crib was secondhand. The carpet was worn in the path from the door to the kitchen. The window in the bedroom rattled in the wind. It was hers. Completely, entirely, without condition, hers. She picked Rosie up off the coat. "Home," she told her daughter. Rosie looked around with the serious, assessing stare she had apparently inherited from nobody in particular and made her sound. The not quite word, the something in between. Nina's phone buzzed. She looked at it, the new number. Onia, November, the one Marcus had given her. One line, "Let me know you got in." She stood in the middle of her small, cold apartment with her daughter on her hip and the portable heater beginning to take the edge off the cold and the secondhand crib and the worn carpet and everything that was hers. And she typed back, "We're in, we're good." 3 minutes passed. She was putting Rosie in the crib when the reply came. "Good." Just that, one word. The same word he had used 10 days ago when she told him Rosie was loud. The same word that carried in his particular compressed economy of language everything it needed to carry and nothing it didn't. She set the phone on the dresser. She sat on the edge of her bed in her cold apartment, and she thought about 11 minutes running through the rain, about $34 in a wallet, about traffic lights holding green on Michigan Avenue, and a door opening in a black SUV, and a man coming out into the rain who did not need to be there, and was there anyway because his body was already moving before the decision was made. She thought about Sophia, who would have been 7 in April. She thought about a rocking chair chosen by a man who called personally to check the setup, about vending machine coffee left on a chair without a word, about a finger extended through a crib rail and a baby's hand closing around it and a face full of old weather finally finding somewhere to put it down. She thought about 5 people in 11 years, and now 6. She did not have a word for what Adrian Moretti was to her. She did not have a category, a framework, a shelf to put it on. She had grown up knowing the names for things, danger, debt, obligation, charity, and none of those names fit what had happened in the last 2 weeks. What had happened was something that did not have a name yet, something that was in the process of becoming whatever it was going to be. And she had decided, sitting in a rocking chair on day 7, listening to his footsteps on the stairs, that she was willing to let it become that thing. Without rushing it, without demanding that it fit a shape she recognized, she was willing to find out. She went to the crib and stood beside it with her hand on the rail, listening to Rosie breathe, counting the steady, sufficient, miraculous rhythm of it. 8 days ago, she had run through the rain with nothing but desperation and the refusal to accept that her daughter would not survive the night. She had stopped a convoy with her body and begged a stranger for her daughter's life. She had gotten into the car. And the man inside it, the man who commanded fear and obedience without raising his voice, who had never in 11 years gotten out of the car himself, who carried a 5-year grief that had not resolved and would not, had made a choice that was not a calculation, had moved before he decided to move, had sat in a waiting room until 2 in the morning and then sent clothing and coffee and a pediatric nurse and a rocking chair and a contract with terms she had set herself, and was now somewhere in this city checking a number that went through directly. Nina Whitmore stood beside her daughter's crib in her small, cold apartment that was hers completely, entirely without condition. Hers, and she understood that she had not simply survived the night it rained. She had walked out the other side of it into something she had not been looking for and could not have anticipated and was not, despite every practical, careful, self-protective instinct she possessed, afraid of. She was not afraid. And that, after everything, was the most surprising thing of all.